Hello, welcome to Conscious TV. My name is Iain McNay, and today our guest is Richard Lang. Hi, Richard.
Hi, Iain.
And Richard has written a book, Seeing Who You Really Are, and it's subtitled A Modern Guide to Your True Identity. And that's interesting. Why do you call it a modern guide, Richard?
I think because it uses techniques which we call experiments. And so it's in the spirit of modern science, really, to look into what you are, not to take on anyone else's word for it, but just to look for yourself at your own direct experience. So we call it a modern contemporary way, as opposed to a traditional spiritual way, I suppose.
It's quite empowering in one way, isn't it?
It
Just
is.
go by your own experience.
Absolutely, yes. Yes, you're the only one that is you. No one else is you. So in that sense, no one has authority to say what it's like to be you. And I think as we grow up, we take on board what people tell us we are, which is fair enough. That's our kind of social public identity. But when you awaken to who you really are, it's not discovering more about your public identity, really. It's discovering your private identity, a kind of inner secret, a wonderful, wonderful secret.
Good. So your kind of journey started quite young. I was reading in your book that you started to investigate Christianity when you were already a teenager.
Yes.
So it was obviously an inner calling to find out more about yourself and life.
That's right. I went to boarding school with my twin brother in Yorkshire when I was 9. And there was a grandfatherly headmaster who was a Christian, but a very open-minded Christian who loved telling stories. And I think it was him that inspired me with a sense of mystery and wonder in some of his sermons. And him being a Christian, I took that route at that young age of exploring the mystery of, as I look back on it, the mystery of being alive through that form of Christianity. And then I went to what we call public school when I was 14, and the people who represented Christianity there were very sincere, but they didn't have the kind of mystical depth that I was, I suppose, used to or looking for or interested in. And so by the time I was about 16, I had kind of begun to move away from Christianity. I was deeply affected by Christianity. I wanted to be a priest, you know.
Really?
Yes. Yeah. I was reading a book called Honest to God when I was 15, which was by Bishop Robinson, which was a radical book at its time. So this is the kind of late 60s, I suppose. And it was all about discovering the ground of being. And finding no help really in the people who represented Christianity at public school, I started to read around other religions, and including Buddhism. And I then found my way to the London Buddhist Society summer school. There was an address in one of the books. And so I went with my brother when I was 17, all the way from Yorkshire to this summer school, where I met two people actually who really influenced me. One was Douglas Harding, and the other was a man called Dhiravamsa, who was a meditation teacher from Thailand. And I was very shy at 17, and there was a meditation class, I remember. I didn't go in. I got to the door and turned back. I was just so, it just seemed completely another world to me. And there was a Tibetan teacher there who apparently could read your mind, and I was so scared of being around him. I thought, if he was going to read my mind, that the game is up. But one afternoon, Douglas Harding was doing a workshop, and someone said, well, why don't you go? He must have been about 60 at the time. This was 1970. I don't remember much of the workshop, but I got the point. He was, after many years, he developed these experiments I mentioned a moment ago, and he did a few of them in this workshop, getting each of the participants to look for themselves at their own point of view, really, which I did and my brother did.
Right.
And we got the point that we're not what we look like. Douglas talks about On Having No Head. That was his famous book. And
so when you say you got the point, that you're not what you look like. What did that mean to you?
Well, it's the most incredibly simple thing. It's noticing that from your own point of view, you can't see your own head, your own face. I can't see Richard's face now. I'm well aware you can see it from over there.
Right.
But my point of view is I can't see anything. My hands disappear into space. And instead of my head here or my face here, for me, there's just a wide open, boundless, aware space full of what's going on now.
And how did that affect your life at 17 years old?
Well, I remember getting back home and my mother sighing with relief to see her two sons who had not been, whisked away into a cult, because that was 1970 and Buddhism even then was a strange idea. But I think, what happened next was I went back to school for one more term and obviously was talking about it. So I met Douglas in the autumn 1970, and then myself, my brother and my mother went by train from Yorkshire at Christmas time, before Christmas, to visit Douglas in Suffolk. And it had obviously made a big impression on me and David, my brother, and my mother, who wanted to meet this man. And that weekend, where there were other people there, as there usually were at Douglas's house, that kind of sorted out my doubts. And I think I just made the connection. I'd awoken to my true identity. Now, I was still a pretty confused teenager, and I had a lot to work out. But I had discovered something that just thrilled me. I think it was, more than anything probably at the time, was just the thrill of being empty for the world.
So talk a little bit more about your early realization, awakening to your true identity. What did that mean for you at the time?
I don't really know now, looking back, what it meant to me. I know that when I got back to England, I went to America after Christmas, went to school there, and then came back to England, went to Cambridge, which was near Douglas's house. My 3 years at Cambridge were really spent exploring this. I spent all my time thinking about it, reading about it, practicing it. I started to run workshops myself in my room at college.
Really?
Yes. And I used to go down to visit Douglas almost every other weekend. And before I left Cambridge, when I was 21, I travelled around the States doing workshops with Douglas. I had hair down to here, and Douglas was a very proper-looking English gentleman. And he was very open-minded.
Yeah.
He recognised that it was important to me, and he was giving me experience of giving workshops. But I think one is I realised I discovered something that was going to be with me for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And I also realised that for me, I wanted my life to be about sharing this. That was just what was apparent to me. I also began to make many friends who shared this as well. Through Douglas, by the time I left Cambridge, I had dozens and dozens of friends. Douglas was a very good host, always people at his house who were interested in being aware of their true nature. Yeah. So it was a very non-hierarchical thing, not a guru thing. Once you got it, oops, I banged the microphone there. Once you got it, you had no doubt about it, and it was then, as it is still now, a question of living from that and exploring it, and discovering new things every day, really, about it.
I know that you say in your book that you still had a lot of the problems that teenagers have, emotional issues and things.
Yes.
So but presumably they didn't have so much impact on you as they would have done, but if you hadn't had this realisation.
I suppose so. I definitely had a key for dealing with the normal problems. I did have all the normal problems, and still do.
Yeah.
But I have a key for dealing with it, a point of view, paying attention. We say, just as I see it's face to no face, so it's problem to no problem.
Yeah.
So I'm viewing the problem from a place that's free of problems, and everyone is free of problems right where they are. But if you become conscious of that, it's a great tool, a great help. And I think, really, one thing is seeing who you really are, And then following that is exploring living from it and in a way trusting it. So...
and just Richard, just tell us briefly about Douglas himself. You know,
Yes.
there's a potted history of him in 2 or 3 minutes about how he came to develop this technique and what he was like in his life.
Yes. Well, Douglas was born in 1909 in Suffolk.
Right.
And his father was member of a group called the Exclusive Plymouth Brethren, which is a very strict Christian group. And they think they've got the way. Surprise, surprise, isn't that unusual? We've got the way and everyone else is going to hell. And they really believed that. So I think they were deep but narrow. They really were sincere. Now, when Douglas was 21, he left. And he left not quietly by the back door, but he wrote an essay saying why he thought they couldn't be right, why it was time for him to move on and explore other things. So he was the worst case they'd ever had. He was not popular. So he was by then training to be an architect, and he was in London. He'd moved from the country to London. And he, I suppose, had decided he wasn't going to just take on trust what the Plymouth Brethren told him to believe. And then when he got to London, he thought, well, how do I know what society is telling me is right? I mean, let me go right to basics here. He had a basic sense of curiosity and determination to find the truth, I think, and independency, and probably a bit of ambition as well. He wanted to be a great philosopher, I think, actually.
Right.
And he started asking the question, really, in his 20s, who am I? What am I? So this would be in the early 30s in London, when the depression
It's a pretty deep
was hitting.
question. Who am I?
Who am I? What am I?
Yeah.
But he didn't want to join another group who told him. He wanted to work it out for himself.
Yeah.
And what was really significant was into philosophy at this time were coming the ideas of relativity. A very simple idea. What something looks like depends partly on how far away you are from it. So Douglas applied this to himself. Well, you see me from there as a person. But if you came up to me, and this is the modern approach, then I would change. And I would just be half a person, a face, an eye. If you could come even closer, then you'd find a layer of cells. And if you could go even closer with the right instruments, you'd find a layer of molecules, particles, peeling away my onion. So Douglas took this seriously and said, well, what I am really is different at different ranges. So if I'm a bit like an onion with layers. I mean, you could go further away and you'd see London and the planet and the star and the galaxy.
Yeah.
You need every one of these layers to sit here and breathe.
Yeah.
So by this time, when Douglas was working out this kind of onion-like pattern to his own being, that he had many layers, he'd gone to India, and he'd gone there with his family, not on a spiritual quest, but he'd got a job there as an architect. And then the war broke out, and life became, I suppose, he felt the risk of the war, and he wanted to find out who was at the centre of the onion before he died. He wanted to find out who was alive before he died. But he got a bit stuck. I mean, in terms of philosophy, you can almost peel away the last layer, but not quite. I mean, what is underneath the particles? This is what science is trying to find out in one direction.
Yes.
What is everything made of?
That's right.
So he'd applied the same question as science applies to objects to himself. He said, well, I'm just an object. What
Yes.
am I?
Yes.
And he got stuck at this last layer. How do you find out what is the so-called reality, if you like, behind all these appearances? And then one day he was reading a book and he found a picture in it which was drawn by Ernst Mach, who was an Austrian philosopher and physicist, and quite influential, I think, to Einstein. He was a sort of early relativist and phenomenologist, I suppose. Anyway, this picture was a self-portrait. Now, most self-portraits you draw using a mirror, don't you?
I've never done it, but I guess you would.
Yeah, you get a mirror and
Yeah.
there's your face and you
Yeah.
get a piece of paper and you draw what you see in the mirror. So actually this is a picture of what you look like at several feet.
Okay.
It's a picture of you as an object, isn't it?
Okay.
And what this picture was what Ernst Mach looked like from his own point of view, not using a mirror. And in the picture, that you've got the room, and then you've got his legs, and you've got his torso, and then in the picture you've got his arm reaching out.
But you don't see his face.
No.
Ah.
Right? And down back one side of the picture, you've got a huge nose going from the ceiling to the floor. Well, if I close my eye now,
yeah.
You see what I mean?
See, yeah.
You've got the biggest nose in the room. And he also, this guy had a moustache, and he drew his moustache, and it was a handlebar moustache, you know, big moustache, and it was as wide as the room, all the way along the bottom of the picture. Huh. Of course, you don't see Ernst Mach's face. It's quite a well-known picture. I think 1890s or something it was drawn. And the guy just wanted to put aside all his ideas and just draw what he actually experienced. And when Douglas saw this, he thought, oh my God, I'm in the same condition. Now, I've got a different body, you know, coming out of here, but it disappears. It disappears. There's no face here.
Yeah.
And so his whole thing, really, in a way, was point of view. From your point of view, I've got a head. That's valid. But from my point of view, I don't find anything here. There's sensations, but no object here, just awareness, you see. And I will take that view, my view, just as being as valid as your view. Both are true. So this was when the penny dropped. This was Douglas discovering what was at the centre of the onion. All the layers. Nothing at all. Full of a view out, a unique view out.
But he still had his mind running.
Yes, oh yeah. Well, part of the view out is your thoughts, you see.
Yes.
And your feelings and your reactions. But my thoughts now are coming and going in this empty space. And it's not something you can demonstrate outwardly. You can never prove you're headless to someone else.
So
they have to look for themselves.
So the space for you is an infinite space?
Well, let me have a look. Yes, it is. That's the experimental approach, you see.
Yeah.
Not even remember what I experienced a minute ago. Let me have a look now. My hand disappears. I don't find any boundary to this emptiness.
Look, you've brought some props.
Oh, yes.
So why don't we have a bit of a go?
Okay.
And see.
Yes.
I remember, I have to say that about 25 years ago, maybe longer actually, maybe 30, a long time ago, I did do an afternoon with Douglas Harding.
Ah, yes.
And I can't say I remember very much about it, and I can't say I got very much from it. So this was the last time that I had one of these. So are we both, do I do it or we both do it?
We both do it.
Okay, all right.
I just explain what it is.
Yes.
This is an experiment.
So this is, yeah.
And it's for noticing the difference between what you look like to others and what you are for yourself. Right?
Okay.
So very simply, if you look in the mirror, you'll see your face.
So I can see myself. We should say there's a little mirror down here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A
Okay.
mirror.
Yeah.
And a hole in the card.
Yes.
Well,
I see my face. I think it's my face. Yes.
Yes. Okay. And where is that appearance?
My face is now over here.
Yes.
But I see it from here.
Okay. But I only see one picture of a face. Well, I'm seeing it from here, but I only see one face and it's there.
Correct.
Okay. And so your mirror shows you what you look like at about arm's length or something.
Okay.
And if you bring the mirror up to you a little bit, it shows you what you look like at closer distance, and that's different.
Okay.
And if you were to bring it right up, you get a blur.
Okay.
And then bring it away again. So your mirror is helping you show you how you appear at different distances.
Yeah. I'm just going to say, people watching this, if they want to stop the program, all they have to do really is find a piece of card, and they cut in a hole, which is roughly going to cover their face like this.
That's right.
And you get a small mirror.
Yes.
And you paste it on there. Small
Yes.
mirror, well, you can see how big it is, very small.
That's right.
And people can do this if they want while we're doing it.
That's
we
right.
start the program. Yeah.
Yeah, sure,
Okay.
absolutely. I mean, this is very, very simple. So I'm seeing where my face is. It's
Yes.
there.
Okay.
But I not only want to be aware of what I look like, but I want to know what I am. That's the question. What am I really?
Yes.
And the mirror can't tell me. It can tell me what I look like all the way up to here, but it can't reveal what I am at centre because I can't get it here.
Okay.
But I want to look. I want to take a fresh look at what I am at centre. So then now I look at the hole in the card, you see. And
Okay.
I notice it's a round hole, but it's a hole, it's empty. And because it's empty, I can put things in it. I can put your face in it now, or your hand. Yep.
Okay.
But it's a small hole. Now, paying attention to it, to the card, if I bring it up towards me, if you try this,
Yeah.
I bring it towards me, then the hole gets bigger. Yeah?
That's true.
And it gets
Yeah.
even bigger.
Yeah.
And finally, when I put it on, I find no boundary to the hole, visually speaking.
Right.
So I've now drawn my attention from arm's length all the way to 0 distance. And here I find this boundless, awake space full of my view out. So it's a little experiment for drawing your attention
Yes.
from arm's length all the way home to what you are privately.
Okay.
That's it, you see. Very simple. Now, if you don't feel wow, then so be it. But I believe no one can see their own face. See, now everyone responds differently.
Well, we have an image. Like, okay, I can look at the mirror, of course, but I have an image of what my face looks like.
Yes.
Now, I'm not a very good artist, so I'd find it very difficult to draw my own face. It would be unrecognisable because I don't have that talent. But somehow, if I see pictures of 1,000 faces, I can pick my face out.
Yes, and where do you can remember the image of your face now if you don't look in the mirror. So where have you
Yes.
got that image from?
Well, it's not only just looking here, it's
Right.
having seen it
Yes.
thousands and thousands of times.
Yes. So you've learned it, really.
Absolutely, it's
Yes.
memory.
Yes. So I think as a baby and an infant, we're not yet identified with that face. I have a friend whose daughter was 4, and my friend asked her to go and wash her face in the bathroom. And when she looked in to see what her daughter was doing, she was washing the face in the mirror.
So she's washing the mirror
Yes.
and think,
That's where she found her face. She
Yeah.
was innocent and hadn't
Yeah.
yet moved it.
okay,
And the same little girl came home from school one day with a picture of her class, and with Mum was going through every face, and she got to a little girl on one row, and she said, "Oh, I've never seen that little girl in my class." Well, who was it?
yeah,
It was herself, you see.
yeah,
And until we're a certain age, we are faceless and headless.
Yeah.
And we haven't learned yet to identify with our appearance. And by the time we're, a child, we are aware of our appearance, but not yet fully identified with it.
yeah. You see, it can change. I remember reading. There was a film made years ago. It was about a plane crash in the Andes. It was a rugby team going.
Oh, yes.
I forget whether they were going from Chile to Brazil, I think, and the plane crashed. And it was an incredible story because half of them were killed when the plane crashed, and some survived, and they were there several weeks, like 5 or 6 weeks, and they were, eating each other in the end. Obviously, the bodies they were eating. But the main guy who survived, who wrote the book, incredibly moving book. And I've gone a long time about that, but I'll stay to my point, which was when he didn't see himself in a mirror for about 6-7 weeks. Then he saw himself in a mirror, and he got such a shock because he changed so much in that time. So obviously his image of himself had remained the same.
Yes.
Yet his physical appearance had
Yeah.
changed quite dramatically.
Yes.
And I guess that happens sometimes.
Oh,
You're holding this memory,
Yes.
and it's out of date because it is the past. It's memory.
I think it's probably always out of date unless you're actually looking in a mirror at the time. And I've had that experience going camping, and after a day or two looking in a mirror and being quite surprised. I think the process of growing up is becoming aware of your individual identity, and that is bound up with your appearance, of course, and your nationality and your family and what you want to do in your life. Growing up is finding out who you are on the human level. And this is fantastic. Language and culture and technology all come out of this. But I would say this is not the end of the story, that your true nature, which is inexpressible really, but we could say it's this boundless clarity, is always there. And as you grow up, you just lose touch with it, or you lose awareness of it, or you overlook it, and you become hypnotized by your individual identity. Absolutely necessary and wonderful thing. Now, if you live and then die, just convinced you're just the one you see in the mirror, I think you've missed out on what is your birthright, the next stage, really, which is awakening to who you really are and discovering your private identity. And you continue being aware and developing your public identity. For me, Richard, for you, Iain, and everything we want to do. But awakening to your true nature is discovering who is at the heart of your human life. And awakening to who is at the heart of your human life, this infinite resource, just empowers you to be yourself even more. It's it's not a denial of your individuality, it's an empowerment of it.
I know, Richard, you also explored Buddhism for a time.
Yes.
Is that part of your life now, Buddhism still?
Not in the same way as it was. After about 8 years, after I'd met Douglas, I met again this guy Dhuravamsa, who was there at the same London Buddhist Society Summer School as Douglas was when I first met Douglas. And I'd come across Dhuravamsa over the years. And in 1978, I heard him talk, and I thought, oh, I'd like to go on a retreat. And I went on a retreat, and it really impressed me, a Buddhist Vipassana retreat. And so at the end of that year, I think it was 78, I went and joined the community. It was in Cambridgeshire. And after a little while, they asked me to train, and then I trained for a year and then led 10-day Vipassana retreats for 3 years.
Yeah.
Very intense experience, wonderful experience. And it was Vipassana meditation mixed with a lot of body work, and that's where I first learned Tai Chi. And so I think I needed a time there where I could just be quiet and still with this experience and realization of who one really is. I just needed to digest it, I think, looking back. And I needed to explore my own way, because I'd obviously been very influenced by Douglas at a young age. And I needed to, I suppose, plough my own furrow, walk my own path, really, which I did. And I don't practice regular sitting meditation like I used to then, but I love it. I love it when I do it, and I'm so happy to have explored another approach in depth, really. And I think one of the things I had to work out around that time was because I was so influenced by Douglas and the headless way and the experiments, and this approach, which seemed to me just to work like that, not just with me but with others. I did wonder what other people were doing. And I found value in this other way. And then I had to work out where I stood between the headless way and meditation and then other things.
Yes.
And I came to a kind of deeper understanding for myself that all these are ways. And one's true nature is it doesn't belong to anyone. And so in the long run, although it was confusing time for a little while trying to work out where I stood vis-a-vis these different approaches, it led me to a deeper sense of my own freedom and independence in a way.
It was one thing that you mentioned in the book. At some point you were, I think, having a little difficulty, and you said you trusted the void to help me. I don't know if you remember writing that.
Right.
But what does that mean for you, trusting the void to help you?
Well, I think for me it means that, for example, if I've got a situation and I don't know what to do, or I'm powerless to do what I want to do, and so I've run out of resources, what do? Well, if you're awake to who you really are, in my view, you recognize that this silence here, this headless nothingness, is a very clever headless nothingness. I take the view that it's the source, that out of this nothing, awake nothing, comes this moment. So I take the view it's a very clever, very creative, fertile emptiness. And I think that in that moment when I don't know what to do next, I probably seeing who I am and paying attention to not only the view out but the view into the nothing, I kind of hand over or surrender or wait for something to come up out of the nothing. And the thing about this is there's no guarantee that it will come up with what you want it to come up with.
Or in the time frame you're hoping.
Yes, that's right. There's no guarantee. It's an experiment.
Yeah.
And this is why it's trust, I suppose. But as you go on, I think you find that it does come up with amazing, much better results than you could have thought. But sometimes you can't understand why that is for a little while.
Yeah, and it takes the courage to stay with it, doesn't it? And
it's courage and desperation. I don't know what else to do sometimes. But also, it's not just in problematic situations, but in ordinary situations. In a way, I think it's more fun. You kind of see what the void wants to do rather than what you want to do, and it is very creative, very creative.
This comes back. I say it comes back. We haven't mentioned this yet, but it's something that's come up many times on ConsciousTV. This thing of free will, and so people all think, well, we have to some extent free will and we can do what we want, but there's a wider picture there somewhere which is saying, well, maybe you don't have as much free will as you think you do. In fact, maybe you don't have any free will.
I know. I wouldn't pretend to have got the answer to this age-old question, but my view would be, probably something like this, that I recognise I have a public self and a private self. And the public self, Richard, you take responsibility for yourself and for the actions you take, and the policeman will soon put you right if you don't take responsibility for that. So on that level, everything applies as it does in society. But there's a private self, your true self, which is the same in everyone, but has a different expression. And this one, it's a mystery. So I don't know whether I could define it in these terms, free or not free. Well, it is. It's completely free and wild and spontaneous and loving and intelligent. And I think it's a kind of giving up and surrendering to the will of that one, to put it in kind of traditional language. So, but once you surrender and give up to the will of that one, you're also paradoxically recognizing that that one is yourself. So I think the experience is there, and then our ways of describing it are somewhat inadequate.
In your book, you have these sort of 9 different stages. I think you originally wrote the book. I'll just hold up again, seeing yes. who you really are. You originally wrote the book for, I think, lessons on the internet.
Oh, yes,
is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And you got a great response to that, didn't you?
Yes.
At the time, and you did it in 9 different lessons.
Yes.
Do you want to take us through briefly each lesson? Not saying in great detail, but just to give people a feel of what's in the book.
Yes, I can't remember really what they are, but I think the idea is to look at one's identity using the experiments, and they approach one's identity from different angles. And one is a visual one. Can you see your head? What are you looking out?
Which we did.
Yes, we've done that. I can't see my head here.
Yeah.
Another one is this, where you see that 2 holes become one. I'm looking out of one opening here.
Yeah.
You see my 2 eyes. I'm looking out of my single eye. There's another one which is to do with movement, where you turn around, and from your own point of view, you see the room moves and you're still. Publicly, you're turning and the room is stable.
This is like the whirling dervishes.
That's right.
Yeah, I've never actually done this, but they can do it for hours, it seems. They don't get dizzy.
Yes. Yeah. Well, there's a little secret here, and it doesn't apply to everyone. You've got to, if you get dizzy, you've got to stop. But one of the most basic experiments is pointing, and I point and look at what I'm pointing at, and I see no face here from my private point of view. And then you stand up and start to turn around, and you see the room going past, but nothing moving here. So you're still. Yes. I would say I'm still and the room moves. Now, when you're aware of that, you can do it for ages. Well, I can do it for ages without getting dizzy, really, because you're still. And from this experiment, you can draw many applications. For example, when you're travelling, seeing that from your own point of view, you go nowhere. I didn't come to the studio here, it arrived in me. Now, that's my own private experience.
Okay.
And this makes a difference to travelling. And when you're driving, you're seeing that the scenery is moving and you're still. Privately, you see, it's like having a secret. Okay. And this helps with stress, really. The world is a stressful place. But here there's no movement and no stress. And you're awake to this place that's free. So the experiment, there's another one with closed eyes. When I close my eyes, you see me close my eyes, but for me the room disappears and now the room reappears.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are others to do with thoughts and feelings. So they approach those 9 lessons, if you like, are just a way of looking through the different experiments and looking at different aspects of one's life and seeing how this very simple realization applies in different circumstances. So.
And you get a pretty decent response from. Is it still available on the internet? The lessons.
No, that was turned into that book.
Yes. Okay.
But then since then we've completely redone the website, and on the website now we have a free course, so you can subscribe for free, and you'll get emails.
Yeah.
Inviting you to remember your true nature and to explore the different aspects of it. So there's another course there that is available for people.
And do you manage to stay pretty much in this flow most of the time in your life now?
I think so, yes, I think so. And so do many of my friends. I'm not saying this is special to me, but it's a wonderful thing. And I think the more you go on with it, the more you realise it's always been there and it's very natural. And if you're not directly aware of the space you're looking out of, you know that it's there, and any time you like you can become aware of it. So if it's not on the front burner, it's on the back one, and you can bring it forwards. And so there's no worry really about it. But I think, yes, and this is the experience of many of my friends, Douglas included, but many friends, that it becomes a kind of just a natural thing, natural. I'm now with you, Iain, and I am conscious that I am face to no face. I'm not particularly thinking it, but I am. I don't see Richard's face at the same time. I see no. I'm built open for you. See, I include you, and I in that sense I am you. I am your appearance. I don't know what you're feeling and so on, but so this is a very different way of being with others potentially. If you go with this and take it seriously, you're discovering that others are not only other, but they're also yourself. And
there's an inclusiveness about the relationship.
Yes. Inclusiveness about the relationship and about the world. It's discovering literally the world is within you. I see the wall there, and I see these 2 walls, and I see the ceiling and the floor in my body, but I don't see the 4th wall.
Yeah.
So privately, for me, I'm not surrounded by 4 walls. There's only 3. I'm not imprisoned. I'm not trapped in this room. In fact, this room is in me, privately. And so I'm seeing I'm free as who I really am.
Yeah.
As an adult, I'm aware. As Richard, I'm not free. So I have both sides. And this is so kind of healthy and delightful. One wants to be aware of it. It's not really a kind of difficult job. It's something that is very positive experience, and I think just becomes, as normal as being self-conscious is normal in a way.
So it's kind of your reference points changed somehow. What was, you saw yourself as a separate self when you were much younger, and then you had the experience with Douglas, and that has brought about an inclusiveness, and that's presumably still evolving all the time.
Yes, exactly. And you see, I think when you're a baby, you weren't aware of your separate self yet. So the process of growing up is becoming aware of your separate self.
Yes.
You've always been your true self. And in order to profoundly believe in your separate self, you've got to kind of forget about your true self. Otherwise, you'd have it always in the back of your mind and you wouldn't really believe in your separate self. So the process of growing up is this profound identification with your separate self. Now, when you awaken, in my view, you realise this is not a mistake. This is a beautiful development in awareness, that the one has become aware of being a little one, a public self, as well as its true self. And so now I, in my own experience, find that living my life as Richard is different now that I've awoken to whom I really am, because I'm now aware of this fantastic resource at the heart of Richard. And of course, once you realise that it's at the heart of yourself, you know it's at the heart of everyone and everything. I mean, you know, it's not... now the life you live, when you're aware of being headless, to put it in very simple terms, publicly it's the same. But privately, there's a fantastic new dimension arisen. So, for example, publicly I'm aware that we're separate. But privately, now I'm experiencing being capacity for you. This is a beautiful, deep, true kind of open secret. And this affects the way you are with us. Now I see I am capacity for my environment. You know, I don't stop here. The space includes not only my body and my feelings, but the table and the trees and the planet. And one sees that one has no boundaries privately. Publicly, you're well aware of the boundaries.
But you're still aware of Richard himself.
Absolutely. And probably more so, I think.
It's very interesting because we've had a whole series we've done on ConsciousTV about non-duality. We've maybe done 6 or 7 people now. And they're pretty much saying that there's no self. That they're, I'm using my words rather than their words, but they are in permanent, there's only oneness.
Yes.
And they somehow, there isn't a they to be impermanent, in their terms, there isn't a they to be in permanent touch with the oneness, but there's just oneness, and the I individual is gone. But it seems you're talking about possibly a bit of a different state, if you like. You're still in touch with the void or the source, the words that you use, and yet Richard is still there.
Absolutely. I really don't understand any other way of being. I mean, if you were not aware of your individual self, then why not walk in front of a bus? I mean, what would be the difference? I'm being a bit facetious, but I find that on the one hand, it's simply, I would just be honest, I'm aware of both.
Yes.
And I think this is fantastic. There's not a mistake or anything gone wrong. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing that the one has now many vehicles for expression.
Yes.
I mean, to me, the whole journey is, in the beginning, when you were a baby, you were one. Then you discovered you were one amongst many. And now you discover you're one and many. We are many and we're one. Now that is a far better condition from just being one, in my view. You've got the best of both worlds.
Yes, yeah.
And I think also that, I mean, to me, it's being honest and it's just being true, and it I think it corresponds with what people have found down the centuries anyway. But also, in terms of the modern world, I mean, how far is the claim that you don't exist going to go? It doesn't look very practical to the problems in the world. Well, you might say, well, it's not about that. But to me, the challenge is to communicate and show how this realization is highly practical and does not fly in the face of science or what we know about being here and who we are. It's an inner realization that supports one's individuality and empowers one, really, to be oneself.
You become very alive and impassioned. Yeah, good. Yeah.
Okay. Really. And you know, it fits in with, you know, so much poetry and art and, yeah. So I know I'm making a plea for this modern way, I think.
Yes.
But it has profound, you know, profound implications. You know, for example, when you're a baby, do you know yet where your mind is now? Because you don't think of yourself as an object, so your mind is everywhere. And the process of growing up is the discovery that your mind is located here, apparently, and other people have got minds, called the theory of mind. So I've never experienced anyone else's mind myself. But growing up is the kind of taking on board that idea that there are other people and there's a self.
Yes.
Now, this is a superb development, and it means that one can own oneself and describe one's own point of view and listen to other people's point of view. It's a real deepening in terms of one's experience of life. Now, when you awaken to who you really are, you still accept that, but you reawaken to a private point of view where, because I have no head, where are my thoughts? They're out in the world.
Where are they? Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. And where are my feelings,
Yeah.
you see?
Yeah.
And so privately, I'm now seeing my mind isn't contained, isn't trapped. It's big. Now, is this good for your mind? It's fantastic.
Yeah.
One of the main problems we have is feeling trapped and self-conscious and critical. You know? And that partly comes from this idea you're behind.
It's just all in there.
Yeah.
Of course. And if you see that there isn't a there for it to be in,
you're out of the box.
It poses the big question, where is it?
I know.
Which is
and
the start of quite a journey.
It is. And the more you go on, the more you realise how much you swallowed hook, line and sinker about what it was to be you.
Yeah.
And it's fully understandable, it's the objective view, but the subjective, private view is so different and so freeing and so creative, you know, and they don't argue against each other, they complement one another, the outside view and the inside. They're not enemies, they're friends, you see. And this was the great work I think Douglas Harding did in his philosophy. He showed how this makes sense, you see,
Okay, we're going to draw to a close now.
Okay.
Thank you very much for coming
delightful
on
to come along
ConsciousTV,
and
Richard.
Spend some time with you.
Absolutely, thank you. And don't forget Richard Lang's book, Seeing Who You Really Are, A Modern Guide to Self-Discovery, and we will see you again soon on ConsciousTV.